record on the computer. All right, we are recording, and I'm so excited because we have the Mindset Gal here. And isn't that exciting to have the Mindset Gal? And now I can't, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
It looked like you couldn't hear me. Sorry about that, folks. So we are here for the Resilient Soul series, and we're so thrilled to have everybody here to be a part of these vibrant discussions that we have on self-care and self-empowerment. And whether you're an expert, an enthusiast, or someone with just a really powerful personal story, we would love to hear from you. And that's what this series is all about. So if you'd like to be featured in one of these interviews, or maybe a panel discussion in the future, or even just in my e-newsletter, I'll be putting the link down below in the notes so that you can register and let me know. You can apply. So today we're visiting with Allie. And I am excited to have Allie here. She is a resilient soul, and I'll tell you, she is one of the most resilient souls because she's an educator. I might be a little biased, but that's because I'm an educator too. And so we're here to talk about self-awareness, self-honesty, just being aware of what you value and what your standards are. And we're also wanting to focus in a little bit when it comes to a growth mindset, and Allie's going to share more with us, is about having compassion for your own story and your own journey, and doing what you need to do to really be able to move forward. And of course, with lots of joy and inner peace. So Allie says that she is 20 something and she's an educator, and she is learning new ways to better herself, and she's here to share those with us. So Allie, why don't you give us just a little bit of a bio, a little bit about your struggle with that chronic anxiety. I just talked with someone earlier that's in the group, and she struggles with chronic anxiety too. So let's just open the floor with that.
All right, perfect. And Cindy, thank you so much for having me on. And Cindy was on my podcast, The Growth Mindset Gal. We had a great conversation as well. And so it's great to be back on here and having a wonderful conversation with you again. And it's funny that with my bio, it says like the 20 something, but I'm going to be 30 this year. So maybe I need to update. You're like 20 something. I'm sitting here like, wow, I should update that. But yes, talking about the struggle with chronic anxiety. It was quite the journey because I actually didn't realize what anxiety was until I was in my 20s. And then I kind of looked back to my childhood and I was like, oh, my work ethic is kind of linked to the anxiety. I just didn't know what it was or what to call it. And with my chronic anxiety is I would wake up just anxious, just waking up to the day. Nothing has happened yet. And I woke up with this immense feeling of dread. And I couldn't pinpoint, well, what's wrong? What's going on? Why do I feel this way? The day hasn't even started yet. And my anxiety would control every single thought that I had. And one of the biggest targets of my anxiety that would be ringing in my head all day was I had a huge fear of like doing the wrong thing or getting in trouble, because the perfectionism is also linked to the anxiety. So I lived a very fear-based life with that chronic anxiety. And I always wanted to be like 5 steps ahead of life. So that way I always did the right thing and I never got in trouble, because of my anxiety was preparing me for any case scenario that was coming through. And I was ruled by the worst case scenario, always prepare for the worst. So it felt like I was kind of just walking through life on eggshells, like constantly on guard and simply not enjoying my life. And I remember, and I used to work in New York City and I had a long commute on the train. And I remember one of the times going to work on my early morning commute, and I was sitting there and I was feeling this over amounts of dread and almost like on the verge of tears, like on public transport. And this has like never happened to me before. And so I'm sitting there on the verge of tears and I'm like, what's wrong? Like, and everything was going fine. Like I had a good job, great friends, great family. I'm in a committed relationship. And so what's wrong? Why am I feeling this awful? Like, this should not be the way I should be living. I'm like, at that point, I was like 23, 24. So I'm like, I should be loving life right now. Like, I accomplished everything that I wanted to at that point. So I remember sitting with myself and I was like, this is not it. Like, I need to take action. I need to make a decision because I'm not going to live the rest of my days of my adult life in this kind of mindset. So I remember thinking, I have to, and I'm a lifelong learner. I love reading and I love finding out new information. It's the educator in me. So I was looking for, okay, what are some solutions? What can I listen to? What can I read? What information can I find to change this? Because I'm not living like this. So I started diving into self-development books. I started diving into mindfulness podcasts, which inspired me to eventually create my own. And one of the big things that I actually started doing was I started going to therapy. That was like the big push of
Mm,
I need to talk to someone. Where
yep.
reading the books and listening to the podcasts, they were very helpful to kind of guide me towards that outlet of therapy. But once I started speaking to a professional and just voicing everything that was going on, and she was able to like validate it and say, this is why these certain things are happening and why you're feeling this way, it was such a relief that I was like, oh, so I'm not losing my mind. Like, this is
Yeah.
good that there's a reason for these things happening in my behavior patterns and my thought patterns. There's a cause. So, and I've actually been to this therapist for about, I want to say 4 years now. And so now I see her like every 3 weeks. It used to be once a week. And now I see her every 3 weeks. And it's been such a beautiful journey realizing that we think anxiety needs to control us, but actually we have the control over our anxiety. We just have to find the research, the people, the tools, the coping mechanisms to be able to combat the anxiety when it does show up for us.
Yes, I agree with you 100% on that. And I really am feeling excited, actually, in a way, that you brought up the idea of getting a therapist or going to counseling, because that is something that I did early on because I had, issues too. Mine were more in the depression room. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really have a lot of anxiety till later on in my educational career. But it was more depression. And
Mm-hmm.
it and I ended up finding out it was clinical depression,
Mm-hmm.
So um, I I I was able to go out as well because I didn't want to live that way either. And I
Mm-hmm.
really couldn't put words on it because I felt like I was doing everything right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Yep.
But it still was like overwhelming. And
Mm-hmm.
so going to get someone else's perspective
Mm-hmm.
is very helpful. And the first few sessions, I just sat there and cried
Yep.
through it all. And so, and I ended up going and actually getting going to a doctor, and I got a diagnosis, and they helped me through that with some medication, which made a huge difference.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I have learned over the years that I don't need to rely on much medication. I used to use a little medication. I was kind of one
Mm-hmm.
of those pill people that, give me something so I can get back to work.
Right.
And that caught up with me as well. And so, but the talk therapy really helps, especially if it's someone that is trained or has experience in what you do
Mm-hmm.
and what you're going through. So you talked about the anxiety. You talked about finding your own path, and going every 3 weeks means that you have developed some really amazing coping skills,
Mm-hmm.
and that didn't include quitting your job, right?
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about some of the other coping skills. And I know mindset is a big piece of it, and that's why you're called the growth mindset gal. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the big things I learned through therapy was understanding to create these coping mechanisms or daily habits to help you with your anxiety and your mindset is simply understanding, where does this subconscious pattern thinking come from? Once you understand the source of where it's coming from, then you can create daily habits or coping mechanisms around it. So when I was talking with my therapist, she was saying to me that a lot of my anxiety tendencies was because of my perfectionism and people pleasing behavior patterns. And she was like, where does this come from? Because I thrive in saying I have such a great work ethic. I'm a great employee. I'm always on time. Like I explained everything of my work habits. And I was proud of it, which I should be. But a lot of the times it did lead to a lot of burnout, which then also on tops of my anxiety. So when I was talking to her about that, she was like, okay, so like, how did you grow up? Like, what was your family dynamic system like? And I was saying how I'm actually the youngest and of two, and I have an older sister. But then my whole life, my parents were telling me, don't be like your sister, learn from your sister's mistakes, don't
Mm,
repeat the same mistakes that your sister did, the whole entire thing. And I was always praised of, oh, you're the good one, you're the one with the good grades, you're the responsible one, we don't have to worry about you, those sort of things. So when you grow up with these very high expectations that are being
yeah.
on you, then I grew up with myself having very high expectations. And having these extreme high expectations leads to the anxiety, the perfectionism, and the people pleasing. So I was like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense of why I am the way I am. Because your thought patterns, your mindset, and your the outlook on life, your mindset, and everything like that stem from your childhood. Like everything leads back to the inner child. And so once you do a little deep dive into where your mindset, your behaviors, your thought patterns come from, then you can be like, oh, okay, I see where that is. And you can start healing your inner child as an adult, right?
Mm,
Be the adult you wish you saw within your realm back when you were a kid. So one of the first things I was doing to connect with my inner child so that way I can figure out where are these behavior patterns and thought patterns coming from was I started journaling. That was the first thing I ever started doing. I read it a lot in books. I read a lot in podcasts I listened to. My therapist also said, hey, start an inner dialogue with yourself. And I know we talked about this on my podcast as well. You love to journal too. And it was funny because at first I was like, what am I just gonna like talk to myself? Like, dear diary, like when we were like kids and like we did like little dear diary. I spoke to Timmy today. It's not like that as an adult.
no, no.
And so what I would do is it would be every week. It'd be on a Saturday morning. I would get up and I would make my coffee. I'd sit in the kitchen, big bright window, and I would just do a brain dump, maybe 10, 15 minutes, like no structure, just how did the week go? How did I feel? What were some things that happened in work, relationships, so on and so forth, just like a recap. And so that way it was kind of very low expectations, like just dive
Yeah,
into it,
yeah.
see what happens, have your coffee, enjoy the morning sun. It's going to be great. I'd play some like nice music with it too, like really create the environment. And then once I started doing that, I started to actually look forward to it because it started becoming a habit, a weekly habit. So I'd get up and I would sit there and I would write to myself and how did I feel? And then I was like, oh, let me put a little structure to it. Now that I'm comfortable with it, let's do a little bit of structure because us teachers and educators, we love a little structure here and there. So I would always start with the little brain dump, maybe 5 minutes. And then I would write down maybe 3 to 5 things that I was grateful for that week. Gratitude was the key thing to kind of ground myself with anxiety. And then the last one was, what are some goals that I have for next week? What are some
Hmm.
things intentions I can set in place to make my week just as good as this week, or maybe better than this week? Maybe I had a bad week. And so once I started doing that journaling, I created a very strong inner dialogue with myself where I was able to, if I was going through an anxiety spiral, and I would be kind of all over the place, I would know how to ground myself again and be like, hey, you're going through your anxious thoughts again. The reason you're facing this anxiety is because you're afraid of getting in trouble because you were not allowed to get in trouble as a kid. Everything's fine. You're safe. You're good. And then I would let the anxiety kind of, run its course. And then I move on with my day instead of letting it really encapsulate me and like just, I'm stuck in the anxiety spiral and I can't find my way out. So one of the biggest things that I ever did was doing the journaling because that creates the
Yeah.
big inner dialogue for myself. And then once I had that, I was able to take the inner dialogue that I had in my journal entries, I was able to bring it into real life and be able to calm myself down when things were happening. And another big thing journaling helped me with was the compassion, because since I had such high expectations, I was like my worst self-critic. Like I would be so mean to myself. I'd say the meanest things. And it was actually during the pandemic is when I really kind of broke through and realized that, hey, I don't have to take life that seriously. Everyone said, let's have a 5-year plan, but we didn't plan for a pandemic in our 5-year plan. So we kind of have to learn how to adjust and realize that things are going to happen. You don't have control over everything, no matter how hard you try.
Yeah.
And then you're able to kind of sit back and be like, you know what? I'm going to do the best with what I can, with what I got, and really understand that you're not going to be perfect every single day. You just learn from your mistakes, and then we can move on. Because when you had a lot of that time during quarantine and we were teaching remotely, we were teaching from home, I had a lot of downtime to sit with myself and journal and have that inner dialogue to understand that it's going to be okay. You're going to figure it out. You've been through craziness before. You can get through craziness again. Because at the end of the day, when you have faith like in yourself and your abilities, right, nothing can stop you. And that helps with your anxiety because then you won't be too anxious about something because you're like, I've been through this before. I can figure it out.
Right. And, I love how you put that together. And journaling is a really valuable tool. We've talked about this before when we were on the podcast, but
Mhm,
I also like that you didn't stop there. You started with the brain dump. And I
mhm,
did a workshop, it's been a few years back, beyond the brain dump, where you
mhm,
put a little bit more structure to your journaling.
mhm,
And because sometimes, depending on your mindset,
mhm,
sometimes that journaling can be a time of
mhm.
just rehashing old problems and thoughts and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, brain dump is a good thing to get it out there, to really express what's going on, complain
Mhm,
about work, complain about what you want to do, build out into that gratitude. A lot of things you're grateful for. There's a lot of ways to do a really healthy brain dump. But
mhm,
I feel like when you're able to take it a couple of steps further
mhm,
and show compassion for yourself, and, if you use journals where you can look back and see
mhm,
where you were a month from now, where you were 2 months from now, 3 months from now, or, back in the back, and see how you're improving. Um, and that just seems to help pull it together because
mhm,
this mindset is not a one and done thing, as you know.
mhm,
It is ongoing. And when you said that, that the COVID gave you an opportunity to really think, it did me too. That's where I did a lot of soul searching because I had put a lot of other things in place
mhm,
when I was on medical leave, because we talked about that and how I just really ran myself into the ground,
mhm,
physically, emotionally, and spiritually as a teacher.
mhm,
And how pleased I was that you're 20 something and you've already got a grasp on what's going on. So you don't have to wait till you're in your 50s to start putting things in place.
mhm,
But then in 2020, I realized that, all the essential oils and all the supplements and all that stuff wasn't doing the trick completely. And
mhm,
that's where I really focused on my own self image and my thought patterns. And I took went through a curriculum that really helped expand my thinking. And I
mhm,
think that regardless of what your situation is, even if you're in a position where you can't quit your job or you're living with certain people that you really just can't go and get out on your own,
mhm.
sometimes you need to expand and shift how you look at things to make them more bearable
Yep.
and to be able to make a difference in your little sphere of influence, because
Mhm,
sometimes we are limited. And don't you find that
mhm,
when you're talking with people, especially, educators, but even family members with children that might have learning disabilities or things like that,
mhm.
those things aren't going to go away.
Right.
So you've got to be able to have a mindset where you can reframe some of that stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that works for you in your world?
So, my podcast, my whole framework and everything is the growth mindset gal. And I have also then the growth method. And it's actually funny. I learned about growth mindset during my master's program a few years ago, where that's the first time I ever heard it. I was like, growth mindset. I'm like, what is that? There's two mindsets. We have a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. I also read the book, The Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck, Dr. Carol Dweck. She's like the poster woman for growth mindset. And it's really the mindset shift of With the growth mindset, it's a world of abundance, which means we come into this world with some skills, but we are lifelong learners and we can always learn things. It's about the process and not the outcome. Where a fixed mindset, where a lot of us are in, is that straight path of you come into this world with a certain amount of skills, and some things you're just not going to be good at, and that's that. And you're very limited to the skills that you have. It's all about kind of like natural talents, and it's very outcome based, where in a fixed mindset, you see failure and rejection as an awful thing. Where in a growth mindset, failure and rejection is just a redirection. That wasn't meant for you. There's other opportunities out there. When you have a
Mm,
growth mindset, you see life as opportunities, and you can learn from your mistakes, and you learn compassion, and you know that life is simply just a process and you can always learn new things. And you realize that things happen to you and you have the choice to either respond to it or react to it. Fixed mindset, you're going to react to
mm,
things. So if you have a bad day, you'll have these harsh emotions. You might take it out on somebody. You might be in a really bad mood because you had a bad day. Where in a growth mindset, you understand that, yes, I had a bad day. You can sit with that emotion, right? And validate it. And then know that I have a coping mechanism. I have a self-care habit that I can use to help me get through this day. And tomorrow's always another day, right? I'm
mhm.
waking up here, heart's still beating. It's another day and I can make an improvement. It's all about the improvement and getting better and trying your best. Where a fixed mindset is, once you failed something, that is it. You don't want to try new things because you're afraid you're not going to be good at it. You don't like being like a first-time learner at anything. Where growth mindset, you love that new opportunity of learning new skills and all of that. So understanding that if you just shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, the way you perceive your reality is completely different. Where when I was in a fixed mindset, if someone, if I got into a fight with somebody, in the Italian way, and we'd be yelling and screaming, I give them the silent treatment, like, I hate you, leave me alone. Where in a growth mindset, I learned I can respond to things rather than react to things. So I can be upset. And then now what? That's always the thing with growth mindset. Now what? I felt the emotion. How can I move past this? Do I need to have a conversation with that person? Do I maybe need to just go move my body and like go for a walk and kind of clear my mind? Do I maybe have to maybe I need to journal it out? Things like that. So understanding that when you're in a growth mindset, abundance, opportunity, being connected, a lifelong learner, and a fixed mindset is limits, scarcity mindset, outcome based, where if you get a test grade and you get a 50, you're like, well, I'm not good at math. I must be stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. Growth mindset is maybe, yeah, you do get a 50. Okay. How do you get a better grade next time? Do we need to study more? Do we need to get tutoring? Do we have to, maybe do also tutoring outside of school? Do we need to do it in school? You find the solutions. It's very solution based, where fixed mindset is very problem based.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of how I've deciphered the two. And it's really great switching to that, especially as an educator, where that's where my school actually started talking about growth mindset. And I was like, oh, I already know about it when they started implementing this in their program. And when you're an educator, using a growth mindset is also great for the students, where if they get something wrong, it's like, that's okay, try again. Let's try this one more time. Or instead of saying, oh, you did a good job, you can say, you worked so hard on this. You should be so proud of it. Right.
Mm,
And really congratulating the progress the student has made rather than the outcome of grades that the student has made. So again, this could be used in your classroom and this could be used just for you as a person. And understanding that once you have the growth mindset, you're also very compassionate of yourself and others, because you understand, because you have a lot of emotional intelligence with that. You understand why you have certain behaviors going on for that day. And you can also understand why other people have those behaviors for that day, and learn a lot more compassion along the way.
yes, yes. I agree with you. And I love that you gave us a description of both, because those are kind of, words that they throw around a lot: growth
Yeah.
mindset, fixed mindset. And you gave a lot of really concrete, practical descriptions so that people can find themselves within that. And I think that your podcast
Mhm.
also addresses a lot of these as you go along the way. So before we get off here, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more about your podcast,
Mhm.
maybe tell us how it got started,
Sure.
and then how we can join you on your podcast. Because, and I think, do you have a blog too?
I do have a website which I used to write blogs, and they're on there as well. And so, yeah, I can tell you a little bit of the backstory of the podcast. So, it actually happened during the pandemic when we were teaching from home, and teaching from home was it definitely took a toll on like the teacher spirit, if you will.
Mm,
And I was like, well, I'm kind of feeling a little down in the dumps with this whole situation, obviously, for so many reasons. And I was listening to a lot of mindset podcasts, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I can also make my own and talk about creating a growth mindset. And I can help maybe other teachers or nurses and people like that have jobs of service that work with people all the time, because it can be very emotionally draining and taxing on you. And so
hmm.
I started sharing, I was like, I'll create a podcast. Like, why not? Let's see what happens, just for fun. And so, because creating a podcast is very similar to teaching, right? It's just in a different realm. And I started making episodes about my own journey, things I've learned from therapy, other self development books that I've learned from, other podcasts. And I was just taking my life lessons and life experiences. And hopefully, this can help another person as well. And then as the podcast grew, I started having more and more great guests that share their expertise in mindset, wellness, spirituality, emotional intelligence, like under the big umbrella of growth mindset, you
Hmm.
included, with balance and productivity. And it just grew from there. And every episode, whether it's me or I have a great guest on, we're simply sharing our insights to help basically like the everyday woman that's just, she's either teacher or nurse, works a 9 to 5, whatever that it is, just learn how to be a better woman in her everyday life and build the life that she deserves, because she has a great mindset and she knows that she has the power to cultivate the life that she wants to live. And that with a fixed mindset, we actually create our own limit. And yes, there are other external limits in life, but with a growth mindset, you see those external limits as, this is a problem, or maybe this is a roadblock that perhaps there's a solution around it that we can go past
Hmm.
it. Where a fixed mindset says, oh, here's a roadblock, I'm going to stop right here and be stuck where I am. So understanding that, sharing these stories on the podcast, that we have the power and the choice to decide how we're going to view the world no matter what's going on in our everyday life.
Yes, and that is a perfect way to end our segment here, talking about, not getting stuck
Mhm,
and opening the door for people to look at things a different way and
mhm,
to expand how they think about things.
mhm.
And get those different and our body is made to do that,
Yeah.
to be
Mhm,
able to grow. And when you've had an injury of whatever type, physical
mhm,
injury, your body learns how to compensate in many
mhm.
ways. I mean, sometimes miraculous
Yeah. Mhm,
ways, and we can do that same thing emotionally if we
mhm,
give ourselves the opportunity to do that.
mhm.
So I really appreciate you sharing the information with us. I know we had a few glitches here with the headphones. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but
Sounds
hopefully,
great now.
okay,
It's
good.
been
I hope.
sounding great for a while.
Okay, good. Um, and so we're going to, when we get done here, we'll be posting your links down below. This is, of course, live streaming in the group with Essentials for Peace and Balance. And we've
Mhm,
had a number of people coming and going. And so hopefully we'll have a lot of people that have felt uplifted and inspired by you. I know that just by talking with you last time on the podcast and how we sort of just kind of hit it off, and we have a
mhm,
lot of similar thoughts and things. And like
mhm.
I said before, I'm just so proud of you and the
Thank you,
millions
Cindy.
of other people out there who, at a younger age, started taking more seriously, their inner self. And so thank you for being a good example for people, because I know from in my field, in a nurse's field, in a lot of different areas, people that have been around a long time, they
Mhm,
get in ruts and they're
mhm,
miserable people.
mhm,
And you are doing what needs to be done to, bring up the awareness about
mhm,
you don't have to grow up and be miserable.
mhm,
You have a
mhm.
choice. And that's what that growth mindset is about. So thank you for making that very clear to everyone. And we'll say goodbye to everybody. If you're watching the replay, you feel free to drop questions, make comments. And like I said, you'll be able to click on those links to get to the podcast and to her website. So thanks again, and we will talk later.
Thank you, Cindy.
All righty. You're welcome. Bye-bye.